Have you ever stopped to reflect on how Jesus' calmness transformed the most chaotic situations in a world filled with constant pressures and challenges that bombard us at every moment? The power of the serenity that Jesus demonstrated seems almost unattainable. But what if I told you that his teachings on peace were not only relevant to his time, but are exactly what we need today to find peace in the midst of chaos? Jesus' life was marked by moments of profound serenity, even in the face of the most serious adversities, and each of those moments offers a powerful lesson on how to face chaos without losing inner peace. In this video, we will explore how Jesus taught us that true strength comes from calm, and how these principles can be applied to the most complex moments of our daily lives. However, it is his last piece of advice that is the most crucial of all. So stay until the end and discover why this last lesson is essential to finding the peace we so long for. Number 1. Calm in the midst of chaos. Have you ever felt like you were caught in the middle of a storm, surrounded by problems and worries, with no idea where to turn? At such times, it seems that the more we try to control things, the more they slip away from us. Modern life plunges us into constant uncertainty, and many of us live on the edge of exhaustion, like a ship about to sink. It is precisely at these times that Jesus' teachings on calm become essential, offering us a different way to face chaos without being consumed by it. In one of the most significant episodes of the Gospels, we find Jesus and his disciples in the middle of a fierce storm as they cross the Sea of Galilee. The storm was so violent that the waves threatened to overturn the boat and fill it with water. The disciples, desperate, struggled to maintain control in the midst of panic. And where was Jesus? He was sleeping soundly. This image is disconcerting. How can someone sleep in the middle of a storm? Isn't it the opposite of what most of us would do? We would be like the disciples, running around trying to control the uncontrollable. But Jesus, with extraordinary calm, slept. The disciples, seeing the situation, did not understand and ran to him, quickly awakening him and asking, "Master, do you not care that we perish?" Mark 4:38. And this is where the real lesson begins. Jesus stands up, looks at the storm, and with just one word calms the storm. "Peace, be still." Mark 4:39. In an instant, the wind ceased and the sea was calm, calmer than ever. The external chaos was replaced by an indescribable peace. But the deep lesson here is not just Jesus' ability to calm the physical storm, but the inner calm that he possessed. From the beginning, what Jesus wanted to teach his disciples was not simply his power over nature, but the importance of having an unshakable inner peace. Even in the most desperate moments, when he asked them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark 4:40. He was not just speaking of the storm at sea, but of the storm that had broken out in their hearts. The lesson was clear. True peace does not depend on external circumstances, but on the state of our hearts. Imagine the impact of this on your life. How many times do we allow circumstances to dictate our peace, thinking that only when the problems go away will we be able to find serenity? But Jesus shows us otherwise. Peace begins within us, no matter what is happening outside. It is not a promise that storms will not come, but that we can face them with unwavering calm, trusting that God is in control. The storm may rage around us, but it doesn't need to be within us. Jesus invites us to trust, to rest in God, just as he did on that ship. This calm comes from faith, from the certainty that no matter how fierce the storm, God never loses control. That's why Jesus could sleep peacefully while the winds and waves raged. He knew that, at the right moment, everything would be under control. The same applies to us. When we trust in God, calm ceases to be a circumstantial reaction and becomes a constant state, a choice of faith. Reflecting on this, the lesson that Jesus leaves us is clear. Calm is an act of faith. It is not about ignoring problems, but trusting that even in the midst of them, God is present. He does not abandon us in the storm, but is at our side, teaching us to trust and maintain inner peace, regardless of what happens around us. He chose silence, refusing to answer even when Pilate, surprised by his attitude, questioned him directly. Jesus did not utter a word, which left the governor deeply impressed, Matthew 27:14. This moment reveals an inner calm so profound that it defies our human understanding. How can someone remain silent when his life is at stake? How can one choose serenity when everything seems to be against him? The answer lies in Jesus' absolute faith in the divine plan. Jesus knew that the purpose of his life did not depend on Pilate's accusations or decisions. His mission was greater than any human judgment, and so he did not need to defend himself. He fully trusted that divine justice would prevail, even when human justice failed. This powerful example of Jesus has a direct application in our lives. We are often faced with unfair accusations, misunderstandings, and hasty judgments. Our tendency is to react quickly, seeking to justify ourselves as if our worth depended on the opinion of others. But Jesus shows us a different way, the power of silence. There are times when the most powerful defense we can offer is silence and the trust that God sees what others don't. Just like Jesus, we don't always need to prove our innocence. Sometimes silence is the greatest display of strength because it reflects an unshakable inner peace. By practicing this stillness, we are exercising our trust in God, trusting that at the right time, truth will prevail. We trust that God acts even when circumstances seem unfair. This doesn't mean we should passively accept everything or never defend ourselves, but that when our trust is in God, we can wisely choose when and how to respond, remembering that our identity is not dependent on the approval or rejection of others. By choosing silence, Jesus also taught us that not all battles need to be fought with words. He knew that his silence communicated more than any verbal defense, and the impact was immense. Pilate, a man accustomed to interrogation and trial, was deeply impressed. This is the challenge that Jesus leaves us: to learn to rest in the peace of God, to remain serene in the midst of adversity, and to trust that, even if the world judges us, God's truth will always be manifested. With that calm, Jesus' silence conveyed a confidence that disarmed human power, a serenity that disconcerted even the Roman governor. This message invites us to rethink our reaction to adversity. What if, instead of constantly justifying our actions, we allowed ourselves to rest in God's peace? What if, instead of trying to control every narrative about us, we trusted, letting calm transform the way we live and face challenges? Jesus' silence was not a void, but a meaningful statement. It was a silence that said, "My trust is in something greater." It was a silence that paradoxically spoke to the power of faith and serenity. Number 3, calm in times of injustice. How many times have you felt powerless in the face of injustice in the world? Maybe you've witnessed something wrong, something that hurts your sense of justice, but the pressure to move on, to not get involved, is enormous. What we do in those moments reveals a lot about what we carry within us. Are we acting with the calm and compassion that Jesus taught us? The parable of the Good Samaritan is a profound example of how calm, coupled with love, impels us to act in ways contrary to indifference in an unjust and fast-paced world. The story is familiar. A Jewish man, wounded and on the verge of death, was ignored by a priest and a Levite. Both religious leaders, driven by haste and their own internal justifications, decided to go ahead. They did not want to get involved or delayed in their missions, and who could blame them, since it was a dangerous path, and perhaps the man was already dead. However, it was the Samaritan, someone who, according to the culture of the time, would be the least inclined to help, who showed calm and compassion. He did not just stop, but took care of the man with his own resources and time. demonstrating that calm in the face of injustice is not passivity, but a deliberate act of mercy. The Samaritan's reaction teaches us a fundamental lesson. True calm is active. He could have gone ahead, ignored the problem and avoided complications, but he did the opposite. He interrupted his journey, took a risk, and offered his time and resources to help someone who, according to social logic, did not deserve his attention. It is that calm, that pause in the midst of the rush, that allows us to see the other as a human being worthy of care and compassion. In the context of our daily lives, this parable challenges us to do the same. We live in a world where we are constantly urged to move forward, to prioritize our own interests, and to avoid the problems of others. But Jesus calls us to stop, to look at those who suffer, and to act with love, even when it costs us. He teaches us that in every act of compassion, in every moment in which we prioritize the well-being of others over our own comfort, we find a reflection of His peace. He reminds us that the calm that comes from God is a beacon of hope in a world full of darkness, and that by acting with mercy, we bring heaven a little closer to earth. This is the transformative power of the calm that Jesus showed us. A calm that not only gives us peace, but also touches the lives of others, leaving a mark of love that transcends time. But Jesus' example shows us that true calm enables us to stop and help. It is not just a feeling of inner peace, but an active choice to act with compassion in a world that constantly incites us to indifference. Concluding the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus asked, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" Luke 10:36. The answer is clear, but the impact of this answer goes much further. It is not just about who helped, but the fact that the help came from someone who, in the eyes of society, was the least expected. This detail teaches us that calm and compassion do not depend on our social position, religion, or status, but on our inner willingness to be guided by God's grace. That active calm is something we can apply in our daily lives when we see injustice at work, at home, or in society. The temptation is to carry on, as the first two men in the parable did. Haste, fear of getting involved, or even rationalizing that it is not our problem, paralyze us. But Jesus challenges us to do something different, to stop and act with love. True calm gives us that courage. It allows us to see that even in situations of injustice, we can be instruments of compassion and change. Just as the Samaritan did not hesitate to put his hands on the man's wounds, we too are called to act in a concrete way, without haste or fear. Calm gives us the clarity necessary to see the suffering of others and act with mercy. This does not mean solving all the world's problems, but being available to help when we are needed, even if that involves sacrifice. The parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us that calm is not just an emotional response, but a moral and spiritual choice. It is an act of faith that leads us to act in the face of injustice and pain, and in doing so, we follow the example of Jesus, who showed us that true peace and true calm come from a willingness to love no matter the circumstances. Number 4, the power of calm in Jesus' solitary prayer. Have you noticed how uncomfortable silence can be? We live in a noisy world where time runs at a frenetic pace, and we have become accustomed to being surrounded by noise, information, and distractions. The idea of retreating to a solitary place in silence seems like a waste of time or even an escape. But for Jesus, those moments of solitude and prayer were essential. He knew that true peace is not found in the midst of haste, but in silence, where we can reconnect with God and with ourselves. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus frequently retreat to solitary places to pray, before making important decisions, after performing miracles, and in moments of greatest distress, Jesus sought calm in the presence of God. These moments of silence gave him the strength and peace needed to face the challenges of his mission. Imagine Jesus alone in the stillness of a mountain or in a secluded corner, with the world hanging in suspense around him. There, in that sacred solitude, he found a calm that the world could not offer. It was a calm that gave him clarity and purpose, a deep peace that filled his spirit and enabled him to act with love and compassion. This is the power of calm in prayer. Jesus taught us that in the midst of our hectic lives, we need moments of silence to reconnect with God. It is in these moments of stillness that we can hear his voice, receive his peace, and be renewed. Calm in prayer is not an escape, but a source of strength that prepares us to face the storms of life with a serene and faith-filled spirit. Following Jesus' example, we learn that such moments of silence are not a luxury, but a necessity for our spirit. They are a refuge where we find the peace that the world cannot give us. As we pause to seek God in prayer, our calm is strengthened, our faith is renewed, and our capacity to love grows. Withdrawing from the crowds to pray in deserted, lonely places, in Luke 5:16 we read, "But he would withdraw to deserted places and pray." The key word here is withdrew in the plural. This means that this practice was not occasional, but a constant habit. Jesus, the Son of God, who had such a broad mission and so little time to accomplish it, always prioritized moments of calm in prayer. He knew that the strength to accomplish what was necessary came from his quiet communion with the Father. What can we learn from this practice of Jesus? First, that the calm we seek will not automatically emerge in the midst of chaos. We need to make a deliberate decision to retreat, to disconnect from the noise around us, to find the silence that enters our spirit. Often, we are so immersed in our routines, responsibilities, and problems that we forget to stop, and it is in that forgetfulness that our inner peace begins to fade. Jesus' solitary prayer also teaches us that true calm is not just the absence of external noise, but a state of inner serenity. When Jesus retreated to pray, he was not seeking just physical silence, but a deep and intimate connection with God. That connection is what allows us to face the storms of life with peace. It is what strengthens our spirit and gives us clarity to make decisions. In Mark 1:35, we find another powerful example of this habit of Jesus. Early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went to a deserted place where he prayed. He didn't wait for the rush of the day to begin to seek calm. He got ahead of the chaos, finding the stillness of the morning before the demands of the world arose. It's an invitation for us to do the same too. The same thing happens when we retreat from distractions for intentional times of prayer and meditation. But what makes these times of solitary prayer so powerful? When we retreat to pray in silence, we create a space where God can speak to us more clearly. In the silence, without outside interference, our worries and anxieties lose their power over us. Solitary prayer leads us to deep introspection, where we can recognize our weaknesses, our fears, and also the strengthening presence of God. It is in this space that we find true calm, because it is there that we remember who God is and who we are in Him. Modern life pushes us toward constant activity, and we often sacrifice our spirituality in the name of productivity. Yet Jesus' example shows us that true spiritual productivity comes from calm and stillness. He teaches us that we cannot be truly effective in the world if we do not cultivate moments of serenity with God. Solitary prayer is not an escape from reality, but Jesus shows us that true calm prepares us to face reality with wisdom and strength. When we retreat as he did, we can see more clearly what really matters. The rush and chaos of life make us lose focus. But by aligning ourselves with God's thoughts, we begin to discern the essential from the fleeting. And that is a lesson we can apply every day. Calm is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It is in that calm that we find ourselves again, where we renew our strength and are empowered to continue our journey of faith. The practice of solitary prayer then becomes a path to inner peace, to a calm that does not depend on external circumstances. In the tranquility of God's presence, we restore our spiritual energies and gain the confidence to face the world with a strength that comes from deep within us. Number 5, calm in the midst of suffering. Have you ever reflected on the kind of inner strength it takes to face suffering calmly? In our human nature, pain destabilizes us, and the instinct to fight against it becomes almost inevitable. Yet when we look at Jesus' example on the cross, we see an extraordinary display of serenity in the midst of the most intense suffering anyone could experience. The crucifixion was not only an event of extreme physical pain, but a time of deep spiritual and emotional anguish. Yet Jesus remained calm, proving that true peace is not lost even when we are mired in pain. When Jesus was crucified, he not only endured the physical pain of the nails, but also the humiliation and scorn of those around him. Soldiers mocked him, crowds shouted insults, and even the 2 thieves crucified next to him belittled him. In the midst of that chaos of violence and rejection, Jesus spoke words that still resonate as an ultimate example of calm and forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. These words reveal an inner peace that transcends any external circumstance. Jesus' ability to remain calm in a situation of extreme suffering teaches us a profound lesson. Calm does not mean denying reality, but fully accepting that even in the worst of circumstances, God is still present. While on the cross, Jesus knew that his suffering had a greater purpose. He trusted in God's plan, even when the pain was unbearable. That calm comes from an unwavering trust in God's love and sovereign control, who sustains us in the darkest moments. This lesson challenges us in our own lives. How do we react when we face suffering? Many times, pain leads us to hopelessness, anger, or heartbreak. We try to escape it or resist it at all costs, clinging to our own strength. But Jesus shows us another way: to accept suffering with a calm that comes from trusting in God, knowing that our pain is not in vain, that it has a purpose, and that God is present even in our deepest wounds. Believing that suffering is the end is a mistake. It is a mistake. Yet Jesus shows us that even in pain, we can find a peace that strengthens us. He teaches us that when we give our suffering to God, we can go through it with a serenity that defies the logic of the world. It is not that the pain disappears, but that the presence of God in the midst of it gives us the strength to endure and transcend it. At another crucial moment on the cross, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. This cry reveals the depth of his anguish, but also his humanity. Even feeling the weight of abandonment, he remained steadfast. This teaches us that calm does not mean the absence of emotion or pain, but the ability to continue trusting, even when everything seems dark. True calm does not deny suffering, but embraces it with the certainty that God is present, even in silence. Jesus' suffering on the cross also shows us that calm in the midst of agony is not a passive attitude. He was not simply resigned to his fate, but actively fulfilling his mission. Jesus' calm was an expression of his total surrender to the will of God. He knew that his death was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. The resurrection was to come, and with it, victory over sin and death. Jesus' calm on the cross was a calm grounded in hope. This is the kind of calm we are called to cultivate in our Christian lives. It is not a superficial calm that disappears when things get tough, but a deep peace that allows us to grow and mature. In our everyday interactions, we can learn much from this divine patience, as it reminds us that we are all in a continual process of transformation. We cannot rush the process of change in others or in ourselves. The calm that Jesus displayed with his disciples is a calm that reflects the understanding that each of us has our own time to learn, fail, and then learn again. Instead of focusing on what is not happening, we can focus on how we can be an active part of the growth process, supporting others with love and patience, as Jesus did with his disciples. This calm is not only a response to challenges, but also an expression of trust in God's perfect plan for each life. Just as Jesus never lost his calm when seeing the shortcomings of his disciples, we can also learn to see the shortcomings of others with eyes of compassion, remembering that we are all on the same path of spiritual growth and transformation. When we practice this calm in our relationships, we not only reflect the love of Christ, but we also create an environment in which people can feel supported, understood, and motivated to continue their faith journey without fear of judgment or condemnation. Jesus' patience is an invitation to live intentionally and carefully with others, showing that the process of growth, whether personal or collective, takes time, and that true greatness is achieved when we move with humility and serenity, just as Jesus did with his disciples. The patience with which Jesus interacted with his disciples also challenges us not to fall into the trap of rushing for results, but to understand that in God's kingdom, every step is valuable, and that although we may not always see the immediate fruits of our effort, God's work in each heart is underway. Jesus did not just give them words, but lived as an example, showing how calm is not simply a matter of keeping the peace in the quiet moments, but of keeping the peace in the midst of the storms of the teaching and learning process, which are inevitable. This invites us to recognize that true love is a gradual process that is built on patience, kindness, and trust, not only in ourselves, but in God's power to transform. This approach to calm and patience also helps us understand that the expectations we have for others must be guided by the same patience that Jesus displayed. Like the disciples, we are all in constant transformation, and each person has his or her own pace. We cannot force growth or demand immediate results, but we can be witnesses and facilitators of the process, providing the support and patience necessary for each person to move forward in their walk of faith. When we allow ourselves to be patient with others, we reflect a peace that does not depend on external circumstances, but on our trust in the divine process. In this way, patience becomes a powerful tool to foster an environment of love, understanding, and spiritual growth, both in our relationships and in our own lives. Jesus' example with his disciples is a continuing lesson in patience and calm, teaching us that true love does not give up, does not demand immediate perfection, but is offered with a grace that trusts in God's work in each person's life, in his time, and in his process. Adulteress shows us that even when external circumstances are chaotic and confrontational, it is possible to remain calm and use divine wisdom to turn the tide. Jesus not only disarmed his accusers, but offered the woman a new opportunity, one that was based on forgiveness and transformation. By not reacting impulsively, Jesus teaches us that calm is not only a strategic response, but a tool of mercy and love that can transform even the most difficult moments. In our own lives, moments of provocation are inevitable. Whether at work, in our family life, or in everyday interactions, there will always be those who try to get us off track, whether through hurtful words, accusations, or dismissive behavior. The true test of our spiritual maturity is in how we respond to those situations. Following Jesus' example, we have the opportunity to choose calm over anger, reflection over impulsive reaction, and wisdom over direct confrontation. When we take a moment to calm our minds and hearts before responding to provocation, we align ourselves with the inner peace that comes from God. This calm allows us to see beyond the immediate aggression and focus on how to respond that is uplifting, that offers grace, and that ultimately reflects divine love toward others. Jesus' serenity before the adulterous woman also reminds us that our identity should not depend on the opinions of others or societal expectations, but on our relationship with God. By remaining calm, Jesus showed that his trust was not in his ability to defend himself before men, but in the sovereignty of God and in his ability to offer forgiveness and redemption. Like him, we are called to find our identity in God's love and grace, which gives us the strength to face provocations with serenity and without losing our inner peace. This episode is an invitation to practice serenity in our daily lives. Instead of reacting automatically when faced with provocations, we can learn to take a moment, breathe deeply, and remember that we are not prisoners of our emotions or the reactions of others. Instead, we are free to choose how to respond, choosing calm, grace, and wisdom, rather than falling into the game of confrontation. This approach not only allows us to live at peace with ourselves, but also positions us as agents of change in a world that is often full of tensions and divisions. True peace comes from knowing that even in the midst of provocation, we can maintain our integrity and reflect God's love by acting with serenity and letting divine wisdom guide our responses. As we meditate on this story, we are reminded that every tense situation has the potential to be transformed by the calm we cultivate within ourselves. Just as Jesus disarmed his accusers and offered forgiveness to the woman, so too can we use serenity as a tool to build bridges, heal wounds, and bring peace in the midst of chaos. Calm is not a sign of weakness, but of true strength, as it allows us to respond to circumstances with grace and frees us from being controlled by the emotions other people try to provoke. The story of the adulterous woman shows us the depth of Jesus' compassion. In this narrative, Jesus not only stands up to the accusers, but also demonstrates a patience and understanding that transcends any human judgment. When the Pharisees wanted to punish the woman based on the law, Jesus gave them a powerful lesson. He looked beyond her sin, saw her soul, and offered her an opportunity for renewal. This is precisely what calmness allows us to do, to see beyond appearances, mistakes, and provocations, and to discern clearly what is really going on. By remaining calm, Jesus not only resolved the conflict wisely, but transformed the situation into an act of grace. His words to the woman, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more," John 8:11, encapsulate the spirit of forgiveness and restoration that he brings. Jesus' serenity in this moment was what allowed the woman to experience profound renewal, a second chance. Likewise, when we respond to provocations calmly, we not only avoid conflict, but we also open space for grace and transformation to manifest. Provocation does not have to be an invitation to chaos. We can, like Jesus, choose serenity, wisdom, and compassion, which not only reduces tension, but allows hearts to heal and relationships to be restored. Jesus showed us that forgiveness is not conditional on perfection, but is based on love and a willingness to look beyond error, seeking restoration of the soul. Number 8, come to me and I will give you rest. We live in a world where tiredness is constant, where demands seem endless. Work, family, responsibilities, and often that feeling that we never do enough. How many times have you felt exhausted without the strength to continue carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? This is the reality of many trapped in a cycle of anxiety and stress. In the midst of this reality, Jesus' words resonate like a balm for the soul. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. This invitation from Jesus is not just for the afflicted of his time, but for all of us today. It is as if Jesus speaks directly to our hearts, acknowledging the depth of our weariness and the daily struggles we face. He does not ignore the weight we carry, but offers a solution that goes beyond any temporary relief the world can provide. What Jesus offers us is inner peace, a tranquility found only in him. This rest is not just about physical rest, but about deep rest, an emotional and spiritual release. Jesus continues, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Matthew 11:29-30. What Jesus offers here is completely different from what the world teaches us. The world tells us that we need to try harder, be more efficient, and pursue more goals. But Jesus invites us to take up his yoke, to walk alongside him. A yoke is an instrument used to work the land, and Jesus offers us to share that yoke with him. He invites us to walk side by side with him, not carrying the weight of life on our own, but resting in his strength. When we accept this call, we declare that we no longer need to struggle alone, that we can rely on his power to sustain us. This call to stillness is also a call to trust. Jesus does not ask us to first solve our problems before coming to him. He invites us to go as we are, tired and overburdened, and to trust that he is enough to give us the relief we so desperately need. That relief does not mean that all of our problems will disappear, but it does mean that we will not face our difficulties alone. Jesus gives us the strength and peace needed to face the storms with a new perspective. His gentle yoke teaches us that true freedom is not found in independence, but in dependence on him. When we accept his invitation, we discover that even though the pressures of life continue, we can live with serenity, knowing that we are not alone. Jesus' gentle yoke is an expression of his love and care for us, showing us that true rest comes from walking with him and trusting in his presence every step of the way. This call to tranquility is more than a temporary fix. It is a way of living, a continual state of calm that allows us to face life's challenges with a peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. Jesus invites us to live with a deep calm that is not affected by the ups and downs of everyday life, but is anchored in our identity in Christ. By accepting this call, we find rest not only from physical burdens, but from the worries that torment us, knowing that our lives are safe in God's hands. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Matthew 5:9. In a world filled with conflict, where discord and violence seem to be the most common thing, peace has become something very precious, almost a rare commodity. We are constantly faced with divisions, whether in our personal relationships, in politics, or even in the most trivial of day-to-day discussions. It seems that many times people prefer to build walls rather than build bridges. Yet in the midst of all this, Jesus left us one of his most profound messages, one that still resonates strongly today: to be peacemakers. Jesus did not just proclaim peace, he lived it and taught it as a fundamental principle for those who seek to follow him. In the Sermon on the Mount, where he delivered many of his best-known teachings, Jesus proclaimed that peacemakers would be called children of God. This statement is much more than a simple blessing. It is a radical challenge to all those who desire to be part of God's kingdom. Jesus invites us to live in a way that is contrary to the culture of conflict, where division and violence are the norm. He calls us to be peacemakers, to be those who seek to restore what has been broken, to heal what is wounded, and to promote unity where there is separation. Being a peacemaker is not just avoiding confrontation or staying silent in the face of injustice. The peace that Jesus invites us to build is active. It involves taking the initiative to resolve conflicts, to build bridges rather than to raise walls. Being a peacemaker is being willing to forgive, to show grace, and to seek mutual understanding rather than confrontation. This is not a superficial peace, but a peace that is deep, that comes from understanding that we are all part of God's creation and that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. This peace is not achieved through empty words, but through concrete actions of love and empathy. Jesus showed us the way by living his life in this way. During his ministry, he not only healed the sick and taught about God's love, but he also promoted reconciliation. He called those who felt excluded or marginalized to come together, to live in harmony, and to work together for the common good. Being a peacemaker also means being an agent of reconciliation, not only with others, but also with oneself. Often we live in peace with others only when we have achieved a degree of inner peace. Jesus teaches that true peace begins in our hearts, and that only when we find peace with God can we pass that peace on to others. This requires humility, patience, and a willingness to forgive both ourselves and others. Being a peacemaker, then, is not just a matter of outward action, but also of inner transformation. God's peace must rule our hearts before we can truly be peacemakers in the world. In our daily lives, this means we must strive to listen more than talk, to understand more than judge. Rather than adding fuel to the fire of division, we must be those who seek to quench anger with a gentle response, who seek to extend a helping hand in the midst of conflict. Jesus does not promise us that being a peacemaker will be easy or that it will always be welcomed. In fact, the peace he calls us to live may bring opposition, especially in a world that favors conflict. But Jesus' promise is clear. Peacemakers will be called children of God. This assures us that our labor will not be in vain, that we are aligned with God's will, and that despite the difficulties, we are building a kingdom of peace that transcends the barriers of the world. Being peacemakers in a divided world is not just an ideal, but a mandate that Jesus gave us to follow. Each of us, in following Jesus, has the responsibility to contribute to peace in an active way. If we want to live as true followers of Christ, we must be those who seek peace, not only in our own lives, but also in the world around us. By being peacemakers, we reflect God's love, and in doing this, we come closer to living in His will, being called children of God in a world that so needs His peace, life. Jesus, by welcoming children, teaches us that true peace is not always found in great ambitions or achievements, but in the ability to appreciate what is simple and pure. Children, with their innocent hearts and their capacity for wonder at the everyday, represent a way of seeing the world that is free of the complications and burdens we accumulate over the years. The calmness that Jesus displays in welcoming the children is an invitation to return to that way of seeing life, an invitation to rediscover peace in simplicity, to step away from the constant pressure to achieve more and instead focus on what is essential: relationships, genuine love, and connectivity with God. This calm attitude toward children also reminds us of the importance of humility. Jesus is telling us that the kingdom of God belongs to those who approach it with the purity of a child, without ego, without pretense. In his calm and loving gaze, Jesus challenges us to strip away our worldly concerns and focus on what really matters: simple faith, genuine hope, and unconditional love. Jesus' gaze on children is a reminder that often the path to inner peace begins when we let go of complications and get back to the basics. Living with Jesus' calm doesn't mean ignoring our responsibilities or concerns, but rather finding balance. It invites us not to be consumed by the hustle and bustle of daily life, but to learn to see the value in the quiet moments, the simple interactions, and the everyday blessings that we often overlook. Jesus shows us that peace is not in doing more, but in being more. Being more in our capacity to love, to listen, and to share. The calm that Jesus teaches us is not associated with inaction, but with action that comes from a place of rest and trust in God. Just as Jesus showed his love and care for children, we must learn to show that same calm and love in our everyday interactions. In a world that constantly pushes us to be busy, to compete, and to pursue endless goals, Jesus' calm gaze on children reminds us that true peace is found in moments of simplicity, in the purity of a heart willing to learn and grow. This peace is accessible to everyone, no matter how complicated our lives may be. If we take the time to see the world through the eyes of a child, with wonder and gratitude, we can find the calm we so long for. Jesus, in saying, "Of such is the kingdom of God," invites us to adopt a mindset of humility and simplicity, to return to the essentials and to find peace in what is genuine and pure. In a world so full of noise and stress, learning to live with that calm is a true blessing. And Jesus' gaze on children becomes a beacon that guides us toward a deeper peace, a peace that is not based on what we have or what we do, but on who we are in Christ, loved, forgiven, and completely secure. In His grace, let God guide our decisions. Forgiveness is an act that frees not only the one who receives forgiveness, but also the one who offers it. This freedom, this inner peace, is a deep calm that allows us to overcome pain and offenses, trusting that true justice belongs to God. Jesus does not invite us to forget the harm we have received, but to let go of the weight that harm has on us. By forgiving, we are not approving the evil that was done to us, but freeing ourselves from the power that evil has over our emotions and our lives. Forgiveness, then, is not just an act of generosity towards others, but a radical choice to live in peace, to let God's calm dwell in our hearts without being dragged down by bitterness or the desire for revenge. Jesus showed us that constant forgiveness is not something we can achieve by our own strength. We need a calm that surpasses our understanding and our emotions. Only through deep connection with God, trusting in His sovereignty, can we forgive in the most difficult circumstances. When Jesus speaks to us of forgiveness 70 times 7, He is calling us to live in a continuous attitude of reconciliation, an attitude that is not limited to easy moments, but extends to broken relationships, to grievances and offenses that sometimes seem impossible to overcome. But what Jesus shows us is that this capacity to forgive, this willingness to free ourselves from the weight of resentment, is what allows us to live with true peace. Forgiveness does not always have a clear end. It does not always happen all at once, but is a process, a path that must be followed with patience and serenity. Jesus invites us to forgive without limits, because forgiveness is a path that leads us to a fuller, freer life. This act of forgiveness, which is not easy, is an act of faith, of trust, that God will take care of the final justice, and that our inner peace does not depend on what others do, but on how we choose to respond to them. Forgiveness is a testimony to our faith in God's love and grace, a reflection of the deep calm that only He can give us. As we follow Jesus' example, we learn that forgiveness does not mean ignoring the harm, but rather letting go of control over what was done to us and trusting that even though the pain may have been real, we can find peace in the serenity that God offers us. This peace that comes from forgiveness is a calm that is not dependent on external circumstances, but on our inner willingness to release what weighs us down. Jesus calls us to live as He lived, with a heart full of grace, willing to forgive again and again, knowing that in doing so, we find a peace that transcends any offense. Forgiveness, then, is not only an act of reconciliation with others, but a way to heal our souls and live in the tranquility that only God's grace can grant. Once we are in control, we can release our worries and live with the calm that comes from that trust. Anxiety, in trying to anticipate what has not yet arrived, consumes us and keeps us from inner peace. With these words, Jesus invites us to let go of that burden, to not worry about what has not yet happened, but to focus on the present. He reminds us that each day brings its own challenges, but also its own grace, and that the burden of the future should not be ours. The call not to worry about tomorrow is an invitation to live with active faith, to trust that God takes care of what is to come. When we free ourselves from the need to control everything, we find space to experience God's peace, a peace that sustains us regardless of circumstances. Jesus is not saying that we ignore our responsibilities, but that we learn to rest in the assurance that God cares for us, that His provision is sufficient for each day. In this way, the calm we seek comes not from having everything under control, but from recognizing that God has everything under His control and that we can rest in that truth. This approach invites us to live with a faith that rests, a faith that is not filled with worries about what is to come, but a faith that lives in the present, trusting that God will provide what is needed when the time comes. By practicing this calm, we not only free ourselves from anxiety, but we also cultivate a deep serenity in the midst of life's uncertainties. Peace is not found in having answers for everything, but in trusting in the one who knows the future and guides us with love and wisdom. When Jesus invites us not to worry about tomorrow, he is giving us a gift, the opportunity to live with a calm heart, knowing that the future is in God's hands. Instead of constantly looking ahead in fear or uncertainty, we can focus our energy on living faithfully and gratefully in the present, confident that the God who cares for us today will also take care of our tomorrow. This is the calm that only He can give us, a calm that allows us to live fully without being consumed by worries about the future. By adopting this attitude, we free ourselves from the yoke of control and anxiety. The serenity that Jesus offers us is not a passivity in the face of life, but an active trust in divine care. Living in this state of calm involves constantly remembering that tomorrow belongs to God and that today we can rest in the certainty that He already has a plan for us. The peace that Jesus offers us is a peace that surpasses all understanding, which sustains us not only on calm days, but especially on days filled with uncertainty and challenges. And so, by freeing our minds from constant worry, we make room for God's peace to rule our hearts, bringing us serenity, confidence, and a renewed peace. Jesus offers us a peace that is not dependent on what is happening around us, but on our relationship with Him. While the world offers us a fragile and superficial peace, conditioned by external and momentary factors, Jesus' peace is deep and constant. It is a peace that holds firm even in the midst of the storm, a peace that is not determined by what we experience, but by the certainty that He is with us, guiding us and sustaining us every step of the way. This inner peace gives us the strength to face any challenge, knowing that regardless of the difficulties that arise, we have the promise that Jesus is with us. When Jesus tells us, "My peace I give to you," He's inviting us to receive not just momentary tranquility, but a lasting calm that transforms the way we live. In a world filled with noise, distractions, and constant worry, this peace is a refuge. It offers us a space where we can rest, let go of our burdens, and trust fully in His sovereignty. The peace that Jesus gives us does not mean the absence of problems, but the ability to live serenely in the midst of them, trusting that His presence is always with us. By promising this peace, Jesus encourages us not to let fear or difficulties rob us of our calm. "Do not let your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." John 14:27. This statement is a reminder that we are not called to live in fear of what may happen, but to live with the confidence that He has absolute control over our lives. This peace is not something we can generate on our own, but is a divine gift, a fruit of our connection with Him. By embracing His peace, we are freed from fear and anxiety and anchored in the security of His eternal love. The peace that Jesus offers is the perfect antidote to the turmoil of the soul. When our emotions are shaken by external circumstances, we can remember that this peace is not subject to those circumstances. It is a peace that comes from faith that God, in His infinite wisdom, is at work in our lives, guiding us and providing what is necessary for us to weather any adversity. By living with this peace, we become reflections of Christ's calm in the world, showing others that though the waves of life may be strong, the peace He gives us is even greater. In practice, this peace teaches us to rest in the promise that we are not alone in our struggles. Jesus invites us to stop relying on our own strength and to rest in His grace. When we take His peace, we not only experience serenity, but we are also equipped to face every situation with a renewed perspective, the assurance that everything is under His control. This peace is a living testimony to our faith in a God who never abandons us and who is always working on our behalf. As we trust in His presence, our peace is strengthened, and our ability to face life with serenity becomes a reflection of His love and care for us, the serenity and wisdom that come from trusting in God. In the desert, Jesus shows us that trials do not always have to be met with haste or desperation. Rather than giving in to the temptation to take control immediately or seek quick fixes, He teaches us to wait patiently on divine direction and the strength that comes from God. Jesus' calmness in this moment demonstrates that true peace is not dependent on external circumstances, but on an internal relationship with the Father. Throughout His life, Jesus showed us that spiritual calm is not a reaction to circumstances, but a posture that is continually chosen as we trust in divine wisdom and plan. Jesus' serene response to temptations in the desert also highlights that God's power is not always manifested in the swiftness or immediate removal of suffering, but in the ability to resist with faith. Jesus was not delivered from temptations, but faced them with such a deep trust in God that neither hunger, nor the desert, nor the devil's promises could turn Him away from His mission. This attitude toward trials is a model for us, teaching us that spiritual calm allows us to maintain our integrity even when difficulties seem to intensify. Instead of giving in to pressure or acting impulsively, we can respond with the firmness that comes from the peace God gives us. In our own deserts, in those moments of temptation and trial, we can find the calm we need by following Jesus' example. We know that we are not alone, that God is with us in every challenge, and that through His word we can find the necessary direction and strength. Jesus' serenity in the desert is a reminder that trials do not define us, but how we respond to them does. Choosing calm and trust in God, just as Jesus did, allows us to go through our own trials with the assurance that God is in control, and that His will for us is always best, even when we don't understand the way at the time. Furthermore, Jesus' story in the wilderness teaches us that calm is not just a matter of avoiding emotional reaction, but of fully trusting in the truth of Scripture. Jesus used God's word as His defense against temptations, demonstrating that serenity and peace are found not only in physical stillness, but in knowing and meditating on God's truth. By doing the same, we can find in God's word the strength to resist the temptations of this world and the peace to not be swept away by the chaos around us. In this way, calm becomes an active tool, a means of living with wisdom and peace, even in the midst of the most difficult trials. In short, calm in the desert is not only a matter of enduring adversity, but of how, by maintaining trust in God, we can use our trials as an opportunity to grow spiritually. Jesus showed us that in moments of weakness and difficulty, we can find the strength to move forward with serenity, knowing that God will provide all that is needed. True peace is found when we stop looking for quick fixes and surrender ourselves to absolute trust in God's plan, allowing His peace to rule our lives, even in the midst of the desert. The desert is a metaphor for the moments of trial in our own lives, where temptations arise in our moments of vulnerability. Like Jesus, we are also tempted to look for shortcuts, choose the easy way, or act against the principles we know to be right. Yet the calmness Jesus demonstrated challenges us to trust that we do not need to give in to momentary pressures. What makes Jesus' calm so extraordinary is that even though He was physically exhausted, He was spiritually strengthened. The fasting and time alone in the desert were not moments of weakness, but of preparation. Jesus knew that His answers did not come from His own strength, but from the Word of God. That complete trust in the Father was what allowed Him to maintain serenity, even when He was confronted with the most cunning temptations. He knew that, as attractive as the devil's offers were, there was something greater and more enduring: the will of God. This same calm is available to us when we root ourselves in the Word of God and prepare ourselves spiritually for the challenges of life. Jesus did not react to temptations with panic or despair, because He was certain that His purpose was in something greater than immediate gratification. This lesson invites us to reflect on our own responses to temptations. When we are pressured to act against our faith, we can remember Jesus' example and find calm in the certainty that obedience to God will always bring us peace and victory, regardless of the circumstances. Another important lesson we take from this story is that calm does not mean inaction or passivity. When Jesus was tempted to turn stones into bread, he could have used his power to solve the immediate hunger, but he chose the path of faithfulness. Jesus' calm was an active calm, a deliberate choice to trust God, even when the solution seemed to be within his grasp. In our own lives, we are often tempted to take things into our own hands without waiting for God's direction. However, just like Jesus, we are called to act calmly and patiently, knowing that the present time will bring lasting fruit. Furthermore, the desert teaches us that temptations often arise when we are isolated or feeling vulnerable. The devil approached Jesus when he was alone, without human support, and physically exhausted. This is a reality for all of us. Moments of loneliness and weakness are often when we are most tempted. But Jesus' calm shows us that even in these situations, we are not really alone. God's presence is with us, and it is in His Word that we find the strength to endure and persevere. Jesus ended his temptations in the desert victoriously, and the angels came to serve him. Matthew 4:11. This ending shows us that when we resist temptations calmly and trustingly in God, He strengthens and rewards us. The calm that Jesus demonstrated was a calm that came from faith, spiritual preparation, and trust in God's purpose for his life. This is the kind of calm that we can all cultivate when we choose to depend on God rather than surrender to immediate pressures. Thus, the desert is not only a place of temptation, but also of spiritual growth. Call to action. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that Jesus' teachings on the power of calm have touched your heart and brought a new perspective to your life. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to explore more content on my channel. We have a series of videos full of valuable reflections and teachings that will undoubtedly add more to your journey of faith. Be sure to check back, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do so now to be part of this community that seeks to grow spiritually every day. Again, thank you for your company, and until the next video.